Okay, so I want to learn a little bit about you because I'm going to tell you a little bit about me, and then if we've got the pitch for this session right, I'm going to then tell you about collective impact. But before I do, I want to hear and learn a little bit about you guys. So, who is framing up an idea about how they can make social change? Who's got it in their head, but it's not in the world yet? Hands up. All right. Who's got it in the world? What's out of their head is now happening. Okay. Who can only achieve what they want to achieve by working with others? Okay, let's go the other way. Who can achieve what they want to do by just getting heads down and doing it on their own? Okay, then you're sort of in the right room. Because we're narrowing it down. You're in the right room. So what I'm going to talk to you about is how to make social change by working with others. Who comes from a family bigger than 3 people? So we all know how hard it is to work with others. Try doing that for every child that lives in your suburb, or every single homeless person in Malaysia. That's what I'm here to talk to you about, is how do you work with others to achieve social change on a population level. So, all right, anyone want to, I won't take any offence if you want to step out now, now that we've framed up how we're going to spend the day. Okay, or spend the afternoon. All right, I can't talk about collective impact without actually saying, why would I be here talking to you about a way of doing social change? This is a process for doing social change. There's so many of them you can choose from. Social return on investment, social enterprises. You're all already involved in social entrepreneurship. There are so many processes for creating social change. Why do I stand in front of you saying that this is one you should at least know about? So in order to do that, I've got to tell you a little bit about myself. So bear with me. I'll only take a minute. So I thought, in wanting to be a social change agent, that the best thing I could do was become an advocate for children and young people. That's my thing, my shtick about wanting to improve outcomes is for children and young people. So I became a lawyer, and I was a children's specialist for 8 years. And I spent the first 4 years working out, well, how do you be a good lawyer? Like anything, when you first start out, you're not really competent. How do you be a good lawyer? And it took me a couple of years, and by the time I had been a lawyer for about 4 years, I had started to see that was enough time that I'd met the younger sibling for the kid that I'd met in those first couple of years. And I realised that I could take older sibling's name off the court report and insert younger child's name, and nothing had changed for that child. And the other thing I realised is that by the time I met them, when they're standing in front of a court facing a prospect of jail, that actually all the things that they needed an advocate for had happened long before they met me. And it was a real lesson in working out how do you feel really impotent inside a system. I was their lawyer. I was supposed to be someone who had the capacity to make a difference, and I felt like a tour guide. So I left the law, I retrained in social work, and I became a drug and alcohol counsellor. And I ran a secondary needle exchange out of the back of my car. And we had something really significant happen in the state I live in. By the way, I roam around when I walk. Don't get uncomfortable when I talk. So, we had something really significant happening in the state I live in Australia, which is our cities became awash with heroin. And we had lots of young people dying, to the point that our political leaders put a big summit together and said, enough. And they called it the New South Wales Drug Summit. And they looked out to the world to say, other cities have dealt with, an oversupply of drugs. What do we do? And they had heard about this thing in the States called a drug court. Now, I had worked in, they looked around to people who knew how to work in drugs and knew how to work in courts, and there weren't very many people left standing. They approached me and said, we want to set up a drug court. Will you come and help? And I thought, okay, I'm prepared to go back in because this feels different. And I honestly can say I wish I knew then what I knew now, because what that was the Premier of our state, political will, saying we will force this system that is designed to punish young people when they commit crime. We will force that system to be therapeutic and put the young person in the middle, treat their drug addiction like a medical problem and make them well. And it was an extraordinary lesson for me in systems change, because you had magistrates who used to punishing, you had prosecutors who were used to telling why they had to go to jail, you had lawyers who just stood and defended that this person should not go to jail. Everyone's stuck in their role. You had the education system, the health system, the juvenile justice workers, family support, families. Everybody had to play a different role if these young people who are otherwise going to jail were going to become well. And actually, not just become well, they would stop reoffending, they'd re-engage in school, they'd re-engage with the dreams they had before drugs, and they would go on to live productive lives. And what it took to get a system that's meant to punish people and make it a system that's meant to treat people was extraordinary. How long have you guys been working in social change? So I'm going to tell you the bit that makes you go, oh. The program was defunded after 7 years. But that's part of the constraints of working in systems change, in social change, right? So that was my schooling in systems change, and made me hungry to learn, how do you take systems and make them serve people better? Systems that are designed with the best of intentions don't produce the outcomes we all want. Otherwise, we wouldn't need social entrepreneurs. So I thought that maybe I should go start running non-profits. And I became over a couple of running bigger and bigger organisations, ran an organisation called Inspire Foundation, met Eon. Was very privileged to be their CEO. So a mental health organisation serving young people, known for innovation. The first organisation in Australia to deliver mental health services online where young people are. When they first started, they were seen as cowboys. It's not safe. How can you possibly deliver a service that's meant to be you and me talking together on an online platform? Now, 15 years later, they're the leaders in the field in online mental health delivery in Australia, and considered a really respectable and rewarded organisation. We had a vision that every young person needed help when they sat down in front of a computer and felt bad. That if they typed help into Google, they would get our service. And we worked so damn hard to make our service relevant. And in the year that I left, 1.5 million Australians used that service in 1 year. 1 in 2. And man, we celebrated it. But did it make a difference? And here's the rub. And this will challenge you about being entrepreneurs as well. We could deliver the best possible online service. But when a young person's sitting on their own in their room at 2 a.m. and types help into Google, I can only help them this much by the limits of my service, an online service. If they need to see a counsellor, if they need to see a nurse, if they need an admission into hospital, I cannot help them. And all I can do as this small non-profit is turn and look into this massive mental health system and see hospitals and doctors and institutions and think, how do I influence them to better serve these young people that are accessing the service I run? And I looked into that and thought, highly fragmented, funded not to work together, funded to support their own missions, not to support children. How do I affect that change? So that's what I've spent the last 5 years trying to do, because it wasn't going to happen in the mental health system in Australia, and it's still not. Highly fragmented system that young people fall between these massive cracks. So 5 years of working around the globe, finding what is it, what are the processes that allow people who want to look at a system that serves young people, a court system, an education system, a mental health system, and make those systems work better together so that the young people get the support they need. That is why I stand in front of you wanting to talk to you about collective impact. After telling you all that, who wants to hear about it? I've lost my clicker already. All right. Let me let me start by getting you to talk to each other. Anyone want to ask me any questions at this point? I'm now going to dive into what collective impact is. Okay, we're set up. I want you to turn in groups of 2 or 3 and have a conversation about what's the difference between baking a cake, putting a man on the moon, or raising a child. Think about it in terms of problems that you might want to try and solve. Baking a cake, putting the man on the moon, raising a child. Do you have that roving mic? Can I take the mic around? Yep. Yeah.
Testing.
Yeah, it's on.
Testing. Testing. Testing.
All right, can I pick on you guys? Difference between baking a cake and putting a man on the moon. I'll hold it. Okay, everyone.
Well, we were thinking baking a cake, we can do it.
Hang on.
Maybe we can do it on our own, on ourselves.
Yep.
Putting a man on the moon, we need a huge team with lots of funding.
Yep.
And raising a child, you need a good teamwork between the husband and wife.
Okay. But?
There's a but. Although we think that we can bake a cake by ourselves, but we still depends on other people to supply the flour, the sugar, and all the ingredients.
Okay. Yes, I love you laid the foundations, and you clearly think like you see systems if you think about baking a cake and supply chains, but you went further than I was expecting you to. Thank you, though. Can I chuck it? No.
I think the major difference in between these 3 is, I think baking a cake, you need a recipe.
Yep.
And you get the right recipe, you can eventually bake a really great, nice cake.
Yep.
But there's no recipes or steps for raising a child or put a man into at the moon. So I think it's quite vague because child might vary in difference, and moon is, there's no steps. So I think.
Great. Fantastic. Great. Anyone else want to have one last? How about you guys? Yep.
For us, baking a cake, you have clear and specific instructions.
Yeah.
Whereas putting a man on the moon, we feel that, it's specialized. You have to have expertise. You have to have a collaboration of people who is actually helping towards that one goal. While raising a child, we feel that, though there's no specific guidelines, there are guidelines that you trial and error and follow the guidelines that you think is best for you. But also, it's not just the father and mother, it's a whole village. It takes everybody to actually collaborate to make a child better.
Brilliant. All 3 of you, absolutely spot on. Thank you. All right. So this small exercise is the foundation, one of the foundations I think about around social change, which is before you move to come up with your groundbreaking solution, first define the type of problem you've got. Because the type of social problem you're trying to solve for will determine the solutions. So I'm going to use those analogies as we go through this is the only time I'm going to take you through theory. in this whole presentation or this whole session. I'm going to take you through 2 theoretical models around the type of social problem that you're holding, and therefore what's the most appropriate solution. I usually try to do this in under 4 minutes because we all know theory is boring. Anyone want to time me? No. All right, so I'm going to jump through these. We'll come back to that. The first framework is called cynefin. It's a Welsh word. Don't ask me why they called it cynefin. What it said, he's very, very clever man. If you like this, if you like what I'm going to go through, this is the YouTube clip. I assume you're going to get all the slides of him talking to the camera about this framework. His name's Dave Snowden. He's a complexity theorist, and he says there are 5 categories of social problem. So the first one is a simple problem. Simple problem is like baking a cake. If you put in all the ingredients and you follow the recipe and you put it in the oven at the right temperature, it is highly predictable what's going to come out, and you really don't even need to be a good cook, even though it might help if you are. So all of you were right. It's simple, it's a recipe. The other analogy to this is cause and effect are really close together. Social problem, put in an intervention, the effect, highly predictable. So this is the language of best practice. Who in this course, or in anything to do with social innovation, has been hearing about best practice? Being sometimes by government, very much a thing that they want to make governments and non-profits deliver. It is only relevant for simple problems. Let's look at an example. Immunisation. You want every single child in the country immunised. Well, some countries do. You know what you need to do, and you want everyone across the country doing it the same to get 100% immunisation, or close to as you can get. Here's another social truism in social change. Best practice kills innovation. You need it for certain types of problems, but the very fact that it's highly predictable means it kills innovation. You need this type of solution for problems where you want a uniform delivery mechanism. Okay. Next type is a complicated. Putting a man on the moon. So here, cause and effect are starting to get really far apart. You've got a problem, you can put a couple of interventions into the system and you can try to get to here, but it's hard to see the linear connection. The analogy is putting a man on the moon. What you need to do is amass all the expertise you can. You've got to coordinate it, you've got to line it up, you've got to support it, but they will get to one solution. There is one solution. You can put a man on the moon. It might take you years. Once you've done it once, you can do it again. All you've got to do is follow that very technical, constructed pathway to get there. Social analogy. Anyone heard of no wrong door policy? Integrated service delivery? Okay, imagine Cyberjaya, all the services that might exist in this area, one single assessment form for every family needing a service. You can imagine it would take a lot of work, a lot of technical expertise, lining a lot of people up, but you can get there and you could replicate it again somewhere else. Both these sides of the spectrum, very technical in nature. As soon as you get over to this side, to complex problems, this is where there is no relationship between cause and effect anymore. The only way you see a relationship is after you've done something, you see it in hindsight. You can't predict it ahead of time. I told you the analogy is raising a child. Who here has kids? Who here has more than 2 kids? More than 1 kid, sorry. Do you have a strategic plan for raising your kids?
I wish.
Do you raise your first child in exactly the same way you raise your second child? So raising a child is a living, breathing, daily example of working with emergence. Highly predictable systemic states, children. On one day, getting my 3-year-old out the door with her shoes on requires a certain set of interventions. On the next day, I have to do a completely different set of interventions. I have to be highly responsive in the moment. This is the perfect example. No one has a strategic plan for raising a child because they are constantly changing beings. In a constantly changing system, strategic plans don't work. This is the domain of emergent practice, experimentation, putting an intervention into the system and watching to see what happens. Close data analysis. If it works, you do more. If it doesn't work, you dial it down. This is the part of the social system that we are generally very badly trained in. I trained as a lawyer and a social worker, all on this side, highly technical. If you want to work in solving complex social problems, you have to learn how to work in adaptive settings, emergent practices, language experimentation, and it's not normally the language of responsible social service delivery. Who's ever signed a government contract saying go forth and experiment? You're usually delivering against best practice. Okay, so the last problem is chaotic. This is usually in response to a crisis, and the analogy here would be a bushfire, where what you're doing is stabilising the situation, opening up communication lines, and you're looking for prevention angles. How do you make sure this doesn't happen again? Now, the interesting place is the one in the middle, the place of disorder, because the theory goes, as social change agents, you and me both, we spend most of our time in that yellow box in the middle, where on any given day we don't know what type of social problem we're responding to know what's the most appropriate response. So what this says, if I'm getting this, yep, the most appropriate responses for best practice is coordination. Get all of the things that you know are highly predictable and work well and line them all up, because they serve families or communities better and they're highly predictable. If you've got a complicated problem, you need really good levels of cooperation, lots of technical expertise lined up, working for the single solution that's possible if you orchestrate it. But once we get over to complex problems, what you need, the most appropriate response, is to collaborate. Okay. So as I was saying, this is the side of the system that we're usually trained in. So this is the second framework. It's not as long. It's called the Stacey matrix. So along this side is how much certainty you have. Lots of certainty, a little bit of certainty. On this side, how much agreement do you have? Lots of agreement, very little agreement. So let's use our analogies and plot them. Baking a cake, best practice. We know exactly what we need to do and we all agree. Decades of evidence, research to tell us. Next one. So what we have to do as social change agents is just go follow the recipe. Next one. Complicated. We don't know what needs to happen. We're far from certainty, but we agree it needs to happen. Lots of agreement, don't know how to do it. It's putting a man on the moon. The best response is use expertise, experiment, and build knowledge. Here's another one. We have no agreement, but we absolutely know it needs to happen. Putting a safe injecting room in a community. Everyone, especially if that community is affected by drugs, everyone agrees we need a place where drug users can be safely used. Does anyone want it next to their house? No. So we're really clear on what a safe injecting room does and doesn't do, but we can't get agreement. It's a political problem. It's an agreement problem where you've got to bring everyone together, try and get consensus, and if not, you push ahead with the majority. We got the chaotic one out the back, where you've just got to create stability after a crisis. But what about the one in the middle? Complex problems where we're raising a child. These are wicked problems, they're social messes. The only way to respond in them is to learn into them by doing. To actually be in the system, observing how it works, understanding what's happening, and constantly adapting. Whew. 2 frameworks done. Any questions on that? Any thoughts coming up? Because my proposition to you is that if this resonates at all, for even some of you, then this tells us that if we really want to address the complex problems that beset our countries and communities and families, we have an obligation to learn how to collaborate. And that's...
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. My question is that social entrepreneurs or social impact people, actually, they are working to help the society, to empower and better the people who are actually underprivileged or those who are in need to come up. At the same time, people do say that government is there as a policymakers to ensure that the people have a better life. And so how the two can collaborate in order to better people's life much better.
You're brilliant. You just set my stage. I'm not going to answer your question because that's the rest of this presentation. How do you bring the voice of the citizen to the role of government together and to create change that they both need? Okay, so thank you. Beautiful question. Shall I just keep going? All right. So if the mandate is learn, if you've got a complex problem, you've got to learn how to collaborate. The question becomes, how do you do collaboration really well? So let's just spend a minute on defining collaboration. All these different words of how you might work together. At this end of the spectrum, I'm going to walk the spectrum. We know this end of the spectrum really well. It's competition. And the thing about social entrepreneurship is that you need competition to become a good entrepreneur. So, thanks. So if we walk up this spectrum of working together better, the next one is coexisting. Okay, I'm aware of you. I'm aware. If we're a system, let's pretend in the room we're a system. I'm now aware you exist. I go up to communicate. We all sit at the table every couple of months. I tell you what I'm doing. You tell me what you're doing. But I don't change what I do based on what you're doing, and you don't either. But we start sharing information. We network. I'm not minimising the importance of that. It's really important. But it's the very first rung of a ladder of working together. When we start to get up to cooperation, this often happens informally. You're running a school holiday program in May, I'm running a school holiday program in May. Oh, I now know that because we information shared. I'll now run mine in June, gives families more choice. So I start adapting what I do around what you're doing. But it's often at a project level and happens informally. When we get up to coordinate, I'll use the mental health example. I'm an organisation that wants to help young people have better mental health, and you're an organisation that wants to help children have better mental health. Your children, I'm young people, we can start working together because your clients, as they graduate, as they grow up, can become my clients. So we start aligning our efforts and resources. And we start adjusting what we do to fit in. This is the language of partnerships and no wrong door. When we get up to collaborate, it says our missions are the same. And we should stand together with a shared set of goals to actually achieve what we say on the top of our front door. All young people will be happy. Sometimes this collaboration often happens inside sectors. Lots of non-profits in a place collaborating together. Government departments, health, education, justice, police collaborating together. In non-profit land, that sometimes gets so embedded that you move into being integrated and organisations join. What happens when we go to your question, where government is integrating what it's doing to serve a community better, and non-profits are too, and maybe even philanthropy and the funding that flows into that community, they're trying to align. How do you get all of those sectors, government, philanthropy, business, non-profits, academia, to come together and actually align their effort and resources with citizens to achieve an agreed change? That's collective impact. That is collaboration on steroids up that end. So let's go back. You're solving a complex problem. You have to collaborate to make progress. We know collaboration means aligning goals, resources and integration. And we know if we want to do it at a systems level, collective impact is a method. In fact, it's probably the only method. So what is it? So collective impact. Has anyone read the article published in Stanford Social Innovation Review in 2011? Woohoo! I'm going to call on you. So this consulting company in the US wrote this article. This is not an academic framework. What they saw, there was these communities in America that we all know really well. In Australia, we call them we call them postcodes of disadvantage. Where if you're born into those communities, your life trajectory, your opportunities, your resources are limited than if you're born somewhere else. And millions of dollars every year flows into those communities through all these different small or fragmented, not connected pieces of money, whether it's government, philanthropy, non-profits. What happened in the States was a small handful, about 9 of these communities, 2 of them are in Canada, so their leaders and their citizens got together and said, we can do more. Surely we can do more than this. And they agreed, very simply, they agreed to lead and act together differently. And year on year, they tracked progress. And what they saw is, at a population level, things started improving for their kids, year on year. So this little consulting company went and said, wow, what are you guys doing? No new money, no new massive policy change, no new wonder drug or silver bullet coming into those communities. What is it that you're all doing? So they went and talked to them all and they said, wow, they all have 5 things in common. In fact, now those authors say we should have written 6 things. That's how non-scientific this is. What it tells us as a framework is if you want to do collaboration to solve a complex problem, that's hard, long-term, messy work, pay attention to these 5 things. That's what it says. What are those 5 things? When I take you through these 5 things, you're going to go, really? Is that it? Have a common agenda for change. Set a shared measurement system so everyone's measuring against the same goals and outcomes. Mutually reinforce activities. That just means help everybody over time turn their resources, activities, focus, people, effort towards those goals. Communicate till you can't communicate anymore. And this new little entity called a backbone organisation. Have a part of the system that's small and all they do is wake up every day thinking about how does this collaboration really excel at making this change. So they just focus on the act of collaborating. So we're going to do a deep dive into each of those and stop me at any time to ask questions, okay? So the idea of a common agenda, I want to point out this picture because it looks like a tree, but it's people all gathered around a tree. So let's put a complex problem in the middle of this room, just by way of example. Let's put in that we all live in one community together, and there's 10,000 children under 5, let's say. We want every one of those kids to arrive at school ready to learn. Let's put that problem, because at the moment most kids are arriving at school not ready to learn, and you've got all these different, some kids arriving really ready, some kids arriving not ready, and they've got all these different, they're starting off from different places. If we put that in the middle of the room, and your government, you have a perspective on that problem that is informed by your role in the system. And you're a business owner, you provide a private childcare centre, your perspective on that problem's different. You're a parent, you're a kid under 5. You are the local police officer. You know, everyone's perspective of what's happening for that problem is different, and everyone's perspective is right because it's born through experience and they play a different role in the system. So most of the time, we spend all our time arguing out of whose perspective is dominant. Government often wins because they have all the money. But they only have a small view of this problem from their perspective. So getting to common agenda means getting everyone who has a stake in that problem or that opportunity and getting them around the table. And you have to run a very good process that builds trust to get everyone to have a common understanding of the problem. Because until you've got a common understanding of the problem, you're just going to keep doing what you've always done. And if you keep doing what you've always done, you're just going to get the same results. So this process of getting common agenda, we would say, takes between a year and 18 months. This is a long-term change agenda. So you need a light on the hill, every child arriving at school ready to learn. You need a process to get common understanding of the problem, usually through data and stories. And then you need a common approach for solving that problem. Here is one community's common approach. Now, I know you can't read that, so I'm going to talk you through it. It took them 3 years to work this out. I'm going to use this case study a bit. It's Cincinnati, Ohio in America, what we would say 5 local government areas, 5 counties come together. They had it started because they had very poor high school transition rates to university, way lower than the national averages. So it started with university leaders and high school leaders coming together. And they went, well, if we want to change high school graduation to uni, we've got to improve high schools, which means improving primary schools, which means improving early learning and care, which means working with parents. They coined the term cradle to career. This goes from birth to 15. They ultimately went to 25, and they mapped on this side student and family support, and on this side academic, everything that that community wanted to see in the life of a child at birth, at ages 1 to 4, kindergarten, grades 1 to 4, 5 and 6, right the way through up. They went to every single child will leave school into further training or a job, changing the trajectory of a community through its children. It took them 3 years to get to their shared approach. That's an example of a common agenda. Once you've got your common agenda, the second element, work out how you're going to measure that. So again, this slide's busy, but let me talk you through the elements. This is the same community. They, along that life course, came up with 5 goals they will all stand for. Every child's prepared for school. Every child is supported in and out of school. Recognises that you can't just work with the school system. Every child succeeds academically. Every child enrolls in college or career, and every student graduates or enters a job. And they put this data into the system every 6 months. 5 goals, 53 indicators for change sit underneath those goals. When they report to their communities, this is just one page, school by school. And you don't even need to be able to read the detail. You just can see this school's doing really well. Dashboard reporting, very visual. Now, what they do is they don't treat data like accountability. They treat data like an opportunity to learn. So when this school, they pull them together with all the other schools in the area and say, what are you doing that's allowing you to create this change for young people? And what's transferable? Now you'd look at this school and say, they're really not doing a good job. Context is king. This school is almost all Anglo-Saxon. This school is 65% Latino. What works here isn't transferable to here. So for this school and the other schools, there were learnings that were transferable. There were other predominantly Anglo-Saxon schools. For this school, they looked out across the country. Who is doing the best in educational reform for Latino kids, and let's try that here. So they have the same set of goals, but even right down to the school level, testing and trying different approaches, what works and what doesn't. And when something works, they share the learnings across the system. Mutually reinforcing activities, this is the third element. So when you've got common agenda and shared measures, it's probably 2 years' work. When that initiative started, 12 leaders catalysed at the beginning. By the time they got to Common Agenda and Shared Measures, which was 3 years for them, they had 72 leaders. Now, 9 years in, including citizen leaders, by the way, they have more than 300 organisations aligning their resources, their effort towards those goals, and they have this community and parent mobilisation to support the work. That's mutually reinforcing activities. Now, I put this up here as a picture of cats, because this is the definition of herding cats. A collaboration, nobody's mandated to be at the table. No one's funded to be there. Everyone's volunteering to be there. The only thing that keeps them there is the promise of change and the process you run. And celebrating early wins, getting the change, over time. But it takes quite a while, up to 5 years, before you see the first changes at population level. So this is the language of continuous improvement and rapid prototyping, putting data out into the system so everyone can test and try and scale up what works locally. And it's all these hundreds of continuous improvement processes that add up to a better system, a system that serves children. Let's do an example. Again, same initiative. They had set their Common Agenda shared goals on the life course down at this end, kids in early learning and care before they arrive at kindergarten. They pulled out all the people in that system in the 5 local government areas that have an influence on those outcomes. We're getting narrow now, just outcomes about kids arriving ready at school. They had all the people you'd expect, teachers, school principals, kindergarten teachers. They dived into the data. This is what they learnt from the evidence. If you want to get kids to read, you've got to get them arriving at school knowing how to do alliteration. Who knew? It's what the evidence says. So they turned to the evidence base. But what was more important is when they looked at who came from different settings, different places in the community to kindergarten, kids in local daycare, very poor outcomes on alliteration, a foundational skill needed for reading. Other kids had it. So already a disparity. So they went and approached the local daycare providers who say, we never saw ourselves as part of the education system. We see ourselves as part of the care system. Come to our table. Understand this data. Help us learn. Okay, we now know that teachers in the long daycare settings aren't teaching the right things. But we know how to teach the right things. Let's bring in teachers who know how to do this and train those that don't. 1-day training sessions, no funding required, turned into lots of pro bono support. Now let's bring them together periodically and get them to share what's working, dial up what works, stop what doesn't. A community practice emerges. Within a year, all kids arriving at kindergarten, the next intake, this massive leap of kids with the right skills arriving at school ready to learn. No money, changed hands. Wasn't a programmatic response. It was a systems improvement. Use the assets in the system to improve what's happening and do that hundreds of times across your system. And you will start shifting the system to one that serves children. Communicate, communicate, communicate. And then this interesting organisation, the last element, a backbone. Imagine all you guys are really, really good at playing a musical instrument. You're the best in Malaysia. But if you all bought your instruments now and played music, you'd sound horrible. What you need is a conductor, someone who's actually going to make you play beautiful music into a symphony. That is the analogy of a backbone. Someone who isn't in the system. They don't deliver services. They're neutral. All they do is think about how can this collaboration work to achieve the change. So they guide vision and strategy, they support this aligned activity, they hold the data and report it out, the data out into the system. They build public will. If there's policy blockages, they work out how to get those policies changed and aligned, and they mobilise funding, not for themselves, but for the collaborative effort. These are small, in the beginning 2 or 3 people. When you're working at scale with 300 organisations aligning, you're still only 5 or 6 people. You're really good facilitators of large group processes. You do really good design work. You know how to get people on board You know, you enrol people in change, your community mobilisers, you're really good at data, and you know how to engage citizens in big processes for change. Everyone thinks this is where all the power is, but when the collaboration is successful, it's the people, the collaborators that are accoladed, never this backbone. They're behind the scenes. So that is collective impact. 5 elements that say if you want to change a system in your area to better serve an entire population, kids, all homeless people, everyone who's been long-term unemployed, everyone in the justice system, whoever your population is, if you want to change it at a population level, think of collective impact and pay attention to those 5 things, and you might stand a chance of making that system work in the way you want it to. Now, if I can, oh no, I want to play you this video just because it's funny. Can we click on? Oh, I haven't got sound. Oh, has anyone seen this before?
This man right here is my great-grandfather. He's the first cat herder in our family. Herding cats. Don't let anybody tell. Tell you it's easy. Anybody can herd cattle. Holding together 10,000 half-wild short hairs. Well, that's another thing altogether. Being a cat herder is probably about the toughest thing I think I've ever done.
I got this one this morning, right here, and if you look at his face, it's just ripped to shreds, you know?
You see the movies, you hear the stories, I'm living the dream. Not everyone can do what we do.
I wouldn't do nothing else.
It ain't an easy job, but when you bring a herd into town and you ain't lost a one of them, ain't a feeling like in the world.
That's it. That is the work. There ain't nothing like it when you bring a herd in a town, you ain't lost one of them, you've got to change system. A system that serves the people you want better outcomes for. Okay, who's got questions? Can you?
If I am a social entrepreneur who's currently working with very limited resources already, trying to create impact, how do you suggest that we do this collective impact? Because it seems very demanding in terms of resources. Yeah.
Okay, it's demanding. It's not demanding in terms of resources. It's the most demanding work you'll ever do, but it's not demanding in terms of money. The thing about collective impact is that the people who start it, I can't say it any other way, you've got to get your ego out of the way. If you think your program is going to create population level change, it's not. You cannot create population level change working alone. No one organisation, no one program, no one government can do it. So what it takes is a bit of selfless leadership or egoless leadership to say, I play a really important part in the system, what I do matters, but what I do is necessary but not sufficient. And the only way we can move from actually everyone doing their small isolated bit into the possibility of a system that's better is if enough of us come together and acknowledge that. So when I did that collaboration continuum, down the bottom was 2 words I should have pulled out, because at this end, the compete end is turf. So if you're a non-profit, you're competing against each other for market share, for clients, for funding, for brand recognition. At this end, the collective impact or even more collaboration, the most important thing is trust. So there's never a place in social change when you're not competing for resources. So you have to create a space where you can come together, acknowledge that you're competitors, but what is it that you can do together that you could never achieve working alone? And that's the bit you say, we will come together for that, and we'll compete. We'll run the competitive ground elsewhere. So the people who start actually have to have this sort of ability to rise above their own mission, their own purpose as an organisation or an entrepreneur, and actually hold a view around the system rather than all the separate programs we all run and strive to keep funded. Does that answer your question? Let's turn to the money bit. The actual money needed for a collective impact initiative at its real core is to fund the backbone, 2 or 3 people. And if you think, say we were a community all living in Cyberjaya, think of the amount of money that's already invested in this community. It'd be millions flowing in through all the different systems, and the layer needed on top to do the coordination of all the systems is tiny compared to the amount of money sitting in the system. And you're trying to get the money sitting in the system to work better, to make a better system. So in the scheme of things, running a collective impact initiative is highly cost efficient, but it is the hardest work you'll ever do because it's about aligning people to a change who voluntarily align. There's no mandate for them to be there. So it's about creating a process for change, hence the 5 elements, where people will at least stay in it long enough to find out, is this worth it? Any other questions? Yeah, great observation.
So I tried sharing common agenda, common goal, and the idea of collective strength and that. I find something behind each group leader on why they want to just do impact by themselves and their own. I don't know why. It could be ego, it could be.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they want to be top of the hill, king of the mountain or something. I don't know. So what's your take on this?
Yeah. So, my experience reflects your experience. So how do you get, there's a couple, I think, pieces of wisdom in that. The easiest way to start a collective impact initiative is because you've got some burning sense of crisis or urgency. So to me, there's a couple of storylines. One is you're responding to a crisis or things have got so bad that if we just keep doing what we've always done, we're never going to get change. Like there's this absolute sense of we've got to innovate out of here. You know, we are stuck and we have to innovate. So that is very little about personal change, like ego, I'm prepared to let go. That's all about the context. So the question is how do you create conditions of urgency without needing anyone to get hurt? Because you can, and a very good way to do it is bring data into the system. Because when you bring data into the system about what's happening in the lives of children, what's happening in the lives of kids who are in jail, what's happening in the lives of whole cohorts of people that live on the streets or are homeless, everyone can look into that data and say, that is not acceptable. And you create a narrative that's bigger than the single leaders. So that's one, create urgency. Either use a crisis if you're unfortunate enough to have one, or create one, usually through data. The other one is you can only start with the willing. Because this work is so long-term and that it is wasted energy if you start with the most resistant part of the system. You've got to start with the willing, but you also have to start with enough people from different parts of the system. If you start with all of the willing people are just non-profit leaders, it's not a cross-sector collaboration. You're not going to create systems change. You will create change in one part of the system, all the non-profit leaders, which is could be a good thing. So what you want to do is try and find 1 or 2 from non-profit. Every government person's got an entrepreneur somewhere. every government department. Find a philanthropist who's prepared to actually take a risk and back the change for 2 years. And you get enough people together. And once you get that, you get these really interesting dynamics happening where you create another table to the dominant way social change happens. Hero leadership, entrepreneur leadership, my turf, my brand leadership. You create another table, small to begin with. You work hard at getting some early wins and you suddenly become the cool table. And that is your biggest, you go from pull to push to pull. Where you've been recruiting and enrolling your first set of leaders, some citizen leaders in there too, always. And eventually you start becoming the table everyone wants to come to if you get some good early wins. But collaboration is absolutely subversive. Everything in the system incentivises you to work alone. Your own ego, the way you're funded, the way we put brands on top of our organisations and it becomes about survival. Everything about collaboration is saying it's counterculture to that. So you are literally working on a way of working that's separate to the dominant way of working. And once you get your head around that, you just go, that's okay if not everybody likes us. We are creating a different way of doing change over here. Does that answer your question? Yeah. You need readiness. If you're knocking on doors of leaders and you're just getting, nah, I'm doing my own thing, you don't have a ready system.
That leads me to the second question.
Sure.
So, what I find is that everybody likes the idea of collaborating,
Mm-hmm.
and as one leader who's going to lead everyone to collaborate, everybody wants to be that leader.
Yeah, so...
That's the whole reason why I started my own group.
Yeah.
They want to be the boss, and
Yeah.
there's many bosses of many groups, and there's one big boss who's trying to make everyone collaborate, be the bigger boss. Everybody wants to be the bigger boss.
Well...
Who are you? Why are you the bigger boss than all of us bosses?
So it doesn't sound like collaboration. Collaboration... This is the thing about collaboration, and it sounds so easy to say and ridiculously hard to do. Everyone who collaborates has to lose because you have to give up something. Even if all you're giving up is your ability to claim the collaboration's success as your own. Because imagine you've got 50 organisations who create a significant population level change. You're one player in that. You don't get to be the hero and say, look what we did, look what I did. It's so we. So even if that's the loss, but most people at the collaboration table have to give up more than that. They have to give up sometimes the ability to pitch for funds because they're not the right person. They accept that organisation over there is better at that than I am. They have to give up potentially market share and brand recognition. So it takes a certain type of leader and a certain group of leaders to do that first. And if you've got one person who wants to be the hero leader of that, like collaborations need champions, they need the spokespeople to tell the stories and all that, and you've got to give your hero leaders roles to actually give them a constructive role rather than one that is actually about strengthening their power base. Collaboration's about equalising power as much as you can. And sharing power. It is true shared decision making.
I think if we're not sure, if we're all fighting about who's the boss, I think we've really forgotten who our real boss is. And if we're in education, that's the child. The child is the boss, and everybody else is the servant. So.
Yeah, but how often do you see that happening?
Oh, yeah.
So but I couldn't agree with you more. So where do you create the places in the system? And you've got to create them because they certainly don't exist without constructing them. You create them where you put the end user, your social design language, you put the end user in the centre and you construct a system around them. The system already exists, so what you've got to do is get the system to shift to better meet the needs of the user. And collective impact is one of the few frameworks that runs on the board at achieving that. There was another couple more. Oh, you'll be next. I will do whatever it takes, should be the tagline to Backbone Leader. So if one day I make the tea for everybody, and the next day I'm writing this, I'm writing the funding submission, and the next day I'm out public speaking and rallying the troops, you do whatever it takes. What your skill set is you have to be an excellent broker. You have to be able to see the system. Most people who work in social change see their part really clearly. So a backbone leader has to be able to sort of see the whole and see it as sort of this living, moving organism that you can change. So you have to be a systems thinker, you have to be an amazing broker, you have to be a chameleon. For you, government, I'm going to talk savvy language and outcomes and blah, blah, blah. For you, parent, I'm going to talk to you about your children. And for you, teacher, I'm going to talk to you about the best evidence in teaching and how we can really, help you bring to life what you want in the classroom. You've got to be a chameleon, and you've got to be across a whole lot of content. You've got to be able to enrol people in change, and you've got to know when to step back and let the people with the power, because you really don't have much power, the people with the power actually do things differently and sometimes fail at that. So it's a tough job.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with your statement that if everybody going to collaborate, then everybody going to do something.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether it's practical or not, but could we consider sort of leadership rotation?
Yeah.
One bosses can hang on for the position for a certain amount of time or certain project. Once it ends on the next one, then it change to the next body.
So I've seen it work well in organisations. I think it can work well in collaborations, but it's this way of working as a discipline is probably only been around 10 years. But there are 2 communities I know of where they change where the backbone sits every 3 years as a symbolic way of sharing power, but also so that different organisations and people understand what it means to create systems change. So they're building the capacity in that community to change systems. Can we get a mic to you so that the back can hear?
I think it would be interesting to know, with your experience, what are the common mistakes that people do in terms of already holding a collective impact? What are the common mistakes that people do?
Okay. So the most common mistake is to start a project. The minute a collaboration starts a project, you lose sight of the system and you start going into project management. So you've got to resist the urge to do what we all do with social change agent, which is move to action too early. Diagnose the system, understand the problem, hold people in a space of actually being unbelievably uncomfortable without action, because that's when you'll get learning. But in the meantime, you've got to find a way to keep them engaged. So moving to action too early is the biggest mistake, and action usually looks like a project. All right, let's take a break from the Q&A. Do you want to turn to each other in sort of groups of 3 or 4, and what are the things that make you think that's collective impact actually might be worth it, and what are the things that make you think, no, this wouldn't work? Do you know what I mean? What do you like about it? What are the strengths? What are the things that make you less likely to try it? And we'll just hear a few of those and we'll call it a day. How are we going for time?
It's good. We're supposed to finish around 5:40.
Ah, okay.
I'm literally reading this.
Oh, the question is, what do you like about collective impact? Like, what do you think that is good about it? And what do you think actually it wouldn't work in my town.
What was good about?
Collective impact.
What was good and what?
And then what isn't so good? What makes you worry it wouldn't work for me? Yeah. Hello.
Sharon.
Sharon. Great to meet you.
Social education after investment manager.
Oh, fantastic.
I didn't meet you earlier on. But I'll join for dinner tonight, so you'll be seeing me.
Good, good, good.
I'll give you a card.
Thank you.
And do you have your card? By any chance?
I've left all my cards at home in Australia. I feel ridiculous.
I think you know you, so that's
Yeah, I was going to say, I will, what I can do tonight is email you.
Yes.
So when we've got each other's contacts, I feel a little embarrassed that I don't have one. Yeah, cool. Okay, see you for dinner. Okay, let's hear what some of your comments are. Do you guys want to go first? All right, let's hear what are some of the comments you thought. What works and what doesn't work?
I believe like birds of a feather flocks together.
Yep.
So when you have the passion and you want to sincerity in doing things, and somehow or other people will come together and we can move forward from there. So like I mean, I was in Bangladesh with some people, and I was alone. Then I met my dear friend, my Arafat in Bangladesh, and we feel that we share our ideas. That probably we should connect in WhatsApp and do something after this. So we met in Bangladesh. I didn't plan together, but when we open up and we have sincerity, want to do a social cause, things will actually come together.
So what was it that allowed the two of you to be open to learning?
First, we are Malaysians. So we are in the foreign countries. So
So you-
we have a common.
Oh, so you've got, yeah?
So
So when I hear you talk like that, there was something constructed that you trusted, that you were a participant of, and you saw each other as similar, or we have enough in common, and you started to trust each other. It's a bit like the process you've got to construct around collaboration. Who else wants to?
Okay, so we were talking about collective impact, which is, we all agree is good. But from an experience where, you identify people in certain sectors and you want them to collaborate, so they all seem to have the same idea as you, the same passion, etc. But then when you really get down to business, to actually talking about a problem, then their individual personalities come out, and sometimes it takes you by surprise, because then they're not really as collaborative as you thought they were. They wanted to be the boss, they wanted to be more dominant, and maybe there are others who are like more quiet and more submissive. So you don't have that balance of power.
Yeah.
And you're already in the middle of it. So what do you do?
Mm. Yep, I think that's every collaboration ever started has that same story. Is you come together thinking you've got common purpose, and you scratch the surface, and therein lies the reason why systems are so fragmented, is because the people that are actually in control of the systems are not aligned. They don't have a common understanding of the problem, and they don't know how to work together to achieve change. So that you've got to construct something around those people that allows them to get to the place you're describing, which is sharing power, common understanding of the problem. Get over those hurdles. But they're going to be there. Okay, other thoughts? Who thinks it won't work? On the spot. Do you want to grab the mic? Mm-hmm.
I won't say it won't work, but I think it will be really hard, especially when you want to have different sectors involved, and losing the ego is not easy. So I think that's one big part that's really hard to get. Especially, if let's say you want the government to come in as well, of course, that's going to be even harder. So yeah, I won't say it will work, but it will be really hard, and maybe it will take a long time before we reach to that common agenda and stuff. To start that collaborative effort.
Yeah. So I think you're absolutely right on the long term. They're usually minimum 7-year initiatives, but some go, if you want to get population level change or intergenerational level change, you're going for 25 years plus. I'm curious though what you think might make this hard work easier. Because it is. Government. Why would government make it easier?
Well, policies,
Yep.
frameworks, so government have to start working together first, I think, and then I think it will fall nicely, because there's so much agencies, there's so much other bodies as well, so how are we going to work together if they themselves have so many and not working together as well?
So you raise an interesting point, because sometimes the narrative is if that part of the system goes and fixes itself, then we can start collaborating. And that might be true in some communities, but most of the time, for government to fix itself, it needs the influence of others, because they've got groupthink. They see the world a certain way, just like we do in the non-profit sector and business do in their. So it's the bringing together of perspectives that allows for the innovation. All right, it's 5:30 on a Friday afternoon. Should we call it a day, or are there any more questions out there? I'm very happy to stay back and take more questions, but I'm also conscious it's the end of a long day for you guys. So thank you. You've been really fun to be with, and I wish you all well.